researching hypocalcemia on organic dairy farms, presented by Dr. Gustavo Schuenemann, Associate Professor and Extension Veterinarian with The Ohio State University. My name is Eric Pawlowski. I am the Sustainable Agriculture Educator with the Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Association, and I will moderate this afternoon's presentation. This event is part of a series of educational programs offered by OFA and OSU Veterinarian Extension to practicing veterinarians, farmers, and animal health professionals who work with certified organic livestock. OFA was founded in 1979 and is a grassroots coalition of farmers, backyard gardeners, consumers, retailers, educators, researchers, and others. For more than 35 years, OFA has used education, advocacy, and grassroots organizing to promote local and organic food systems. We are also one of the country's oldest and largest accredited organic certification agencies, certifying a diversity of operations throughout the Midwest. For more information about OFA, you can find it on the web, www.ofa.org. With an office in every county and celebrating its 101st year, OSU Extension is the official outreach program of The Ohio State University's College of Food, Agriculture, and Environmental Sciences, with additional faculty and staff in the College of Education and Human Ecology and the College of Veterinary Medicine. The core of OSU Extension focuses on 4 areas: enhancing agriculture and the environment, strengthening families and communities, advancing employment and income opportunities, and preparing youth for success. Partial funding of this webinar was provided by the North Central Region Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Program. Since in the last 10 years, NCR-SARE has awarded more than $40 million worth of competitive grants to farmers, researchers, educators, public, and private institutions, nonprofit groups, and others exploring sustainable agriculture in 12 states. We thank SARE for this support. The questions this afternoon will be moderated. If you have a question, please type it into the question box on your screen. We will have time for questions at the end of the presentation. Please feel free to submit questions or points of clarification as they come to mind. Dr. Schuenemann will monitor questions and may address them during the presentation. Otherwise, questions will be held until the designated question period at the end. OFA is pleased and fortunate to introduce Dr. Schuenemann as our presenter. Dr. Schuenemann has direct experience in clinical, production, and research aspects of the dairy industry, and we hope that this presentation can enhance your triple bottom line of your dairy operation. Without further ado, Dr. Schuenemann.
Well, thanks, Eric, for the introduction. I hope you can see my screen there, and I just want to move the panel right here. So, well, thanks for those that are already signing in. And so I'm going to go ahead and start the presentation. So I'll touch base on this managing and monitoring hypocalcemia in dairy cows, and a specific for organic farms. And in general, it's the same for both, either it's a conventional farm or it's an organic farm. I just want to kind of emphasize a little bit and specific because of how we do prevention. You know, how in the first place we do prevent hypocalcemia, and that might be a little bit different of how we do it in conventional because of the technology we have available versus how we do in organic, and because of some of the restriction from the on what we can use according to the National Organic Program. So why hypocalcemia is important? There are a number of implications of the calcium status. So how the cow keeps the balance in the calcium in their body, that really matters because they are involved in a number of physiological processes. And one is the muscle contraction, and that is specifically very important for parturition. Right? Without calcium, basically the parturition can work, and also the nerve system and enzymes reaction, and the most important is the immune function, because I'm going to emphasize in my presentation how do we prevent this calcium imbalances and how that affects the immune system. If the immune system is affected, then the cow has some metabolic and infectious diseases. And so when we have problems with keeping the calcium balance, and remember this is usually, around parturition, when the cow has the biggest challenge and exchange of calcium between the stores and the blood in circulation and milk of the colostrum. So it's associated with rumen motility, and that is a direct association with feed intake and poor productivity, increased susceptibility of those metabolic and infectious diseases. And if we do have sick cows, that also increases the risk for cholera. And it's particularly important for organic cows. And I'll touch base on how these feed management, how the interaction with water quality, how that, how the cow goes through this transition, how they perform based on how we feed them and what is the water quality that we are providing to these cows. So for the endocrine control of calcium homeostasis, it's a very tight control, and everything is around, keeping in blood, in circulation. This is the calcium in circulation. It's very between 8.5 to 10, 0.5 milligrams by deciliter. So this is a very tight regulator. The cow has to keep, that range. It's almost 2 milligrams there. And so this is very important because the cow has to keep it in control. So how the cow control this, and usually is, how we feed them and the water quality. That is what is available for the GI tract for absorption. And anything that is absorbed is going to go to the blood full of calcium. And then there is a communication between what is available in blood and how is the status in the GI tract based on how we feed and the physiological stage of the cow, whether this is a dry cow or a lactating cow, right? There is a two-way communication with the bone. Most cows will store calcium there, and they will use, the physiological process when the cow is in need, start releasing a huge amount of calcium from the bone, and that became really quick available for the blood. So, and the cow can, rely on how much calcium is stored in bones. But also there are two more components in this picture of calcium regulation. This is the parathyroid gland, right? That is a hormonal control directly in the bone storage and also at the kidney level. So the kidney, this is very important because when the cow is in need of calcium, usually we are not going to find calcium in urine. So the kidney is keeping every single calcium, for the system. So it's a very tight control. Is how much is available in the diet, how much calcium is available in the bones and the storage. And the parathyroid gland, it also, it can release. It helps release the calcium from the storage as well as helps keep the calcium. It tells the kidney to keep all the calcium in blood. So all these four components, kidney, parathyroid gland, and bones, and what is available in feed, in the GI tract, the cow can sort of, regulate that. What the cow cannot regulate is how much goes to milk, right? So, and this is why it's challenging for the cow early on in lactation, because usually cows are going to have very limited dry matter intake, a few days prior to parturition and a few days after parturition. So, and yet we keep milking them early on in lactation, and they cannot control how much calcium goes to milk. If the udder says, give me 40 grams of calcium, the system has to provide. And then this is, sometimes the challenge on how we manage this. And it's just because of the onset of lactation. And then remember, first is, all the colostrum synthesis, and the first 24 hours of, after parturition, the cow is going to, we're going to milk the colostrum, and from then on, it's just every day the cow is going to give 40, 45 pounds or 50 pounds of milk. So it really matters, our feed management, water quality that I'm going to touch a little bit, how we manage cows prior to parturition and right after parturition really matters, because here is what dictates how much is available for the cows, and especially when we have the onset of lactation. So I won't go much in detail. I just want to mention this because I think it is important to understand the basics, what the cow can control and what the cow cannot control. So these are just, in general, prevalence of metabolic problem, or what we call Calving-Related events, right? So, and these are just for the entire U.S. dairy cows. So all cows, on average, based on percent of calvings, metritis is going to be about 18% of the cows that's going to have uterine infections in the uterus, and this is defined within the first 20 days of milk. So the numbers on top of each bar represent the average, and the numbers within the white box represent kind of the range. So there is a range there between farm that has 6% and farm that has almost 40%. And the next one is retained fetal membranes. And this is just the cow retain the fetal membranes after parturition, pregnancy losses, and about 12%. Stillbirth, this is just a calf that is born dead or die within 24 hours after calving. Milk fever, and this is a metabolic problem, and we will touch base on this specific on how to prevent, because most of our talk is today focus on milk fever or hypocalcemia. This is the clinical event, right? And even though we don't have many clinical events, the subclinical, is equally important, and then they have a profound negative effect in the immune system. DAs, this is displaced abomasum, and so this is about 3.8%, and then ketosis, this is just energy problems early on in lactation. So this is what we are going to talk about. This is the still is 4.9% on average, and the clinical and the subclinical event will dictate many of these infectious problems. So controlling this milk fever is really important because it dictates to some extent how the system is going to work later on. So I go through hypocalcemia more in detail. This is a study that they collect blood samples from cows within 48 hours after calving. So it is important when you collect blood samples and whether or not the farm is using any sort of calcium supplement, either a bolus or IV calcium. So as what you can see here, you're going to see calcium in two different units, right? But this is about the same, either millimolar, this is a metric unit, or milligram by deciliter. So 2.0 is the same, millimolars is the same as 8.0 milligram by deciliter. So here what you have in the x-axis lactation numbers, so these are heifers. So they were heifers prior to calving, and they became third lactation cows, second lactation, third, fourth, and so on, until 6 and 7 lactation. So the gray box represent normal cows. So if the cow has more than 2.0 or 8.0 is what we consider normal. So from 8 to 10.5 or 11, this is a normal cows. Each one of these dots represent a cow, right? So there are almost 1,500 cows in these in several farms. So what you can see is that this box here, the subclinical, right? There is a number of cows here. They don't show any clinical signs, right? And you can see that 25% of heifers, so they were heifers, go through parturition, initiate lactation. 25% of them, you cannot tell anything whether or not they are sick, and yet they have calcium status compromised. So they are below what we consider normal. And as the cow age, second, third, or fourth, so remember that these are the cows that you need in any dairy farm. So usually second and third lactation, you know, by the second and third lactation, the cow will become mature and will produce more milk, right? So this is what we all want, you know, this population of cows, especially these cows, because these are the cows that produce, you know, a lot of milk. So as the cow age, you know, that also increases the subclinical case. So there is a direct association also how much the milk a cow produces, specifically associated with age. But in general, below 1.5 nanogram, you know, here is milk fever. This is when you see the cow with a clinical sign, right? So it could be a downer cow, so basically she can get up. And and in general, what we say, regardless of parity number, every one cow that you have with milk fever, you're going to have about 20, 25 cows more, you know, that you don't know which one is, but they are compromised, they have compromised the calcium status, right? So for every clinical cases, you're going to have about 20 more or 25 more cows there that have the compromise. And I think this is the most important, because these are equally affected as these cows. Here, you see the clinical signs. These are very easy because the cow is down. These are cows that are acting normally. It's difficult to tell. Probably these are the cows that get sick, right? Because the immune function, the immune system cannot work. So there are a number of studies that shows the relationship between a calcium status, energy profile, and neutrophil function. The neutrophil is just basic cells of the immune system and how that works. So the best predictor for NIFAS and DHBA, so NIFAS is basically just the cow are mobilizing fat from the store early on in lactations, and DHBA is basically an indicator of energy status, right? Early on in lactation. What, you know, directly, you know, the best predictor for basically these two, NIFAS and DHBA, is what we call, it determines the energy balance of the cow. It is associated with calcium status, right? So NIFAS and DHBA are direct associated, you know, with calcium status. And the energy and calcium balance, they do, those combined, they do affect the immune system. And this is what you see here. And regardless of what is the uterine discharge, you know, and when that happens after parturition, we know that that is bad for cows, and those cows take longer to become pregnant. So it does have an implication on reproductive performance, so becoming a cow pregnant, and depending on severity, whether that is on day 7 after parturition or day 11 after parturition, has a severe metritis, those cows that has fever, you know, the clinical sign of sickness, and you might see a drop in milk production, you know, basically because cows either do not eat or do not drink. You know, uterine diseases seems to be painful for cows. So I'll share with you now an observational study that we did, and this is in an organic farm. So I'll share with you, and if you have questions regarding how the cows were fed and how the diet for this particular farm, I'll be happy to chat more at the end of the presentation. And but basically what we did there is we started looking, you know, start bleeding cows at calving, right? And we started bleeding cows at calving, and right after calving, you know, within 2 hours. And then we knew how pretty fresh cows were fed and their diet and their water quality. Then after parturition, we start bleeding cows. You know, the diet sometimes is a little bit different. Remember that some of these cows are grazing. And so we just want to know how, you know, how high, what was the prevalence of hypocalcemia within 2 hours after parturition in these cows. And the most important is, you know, all baby calves, especially those females that are going to keep the hormone replacement, they went through the same colostrum management. And then we follow them up, as we also follow the cows, whether or not the cows are sick, and how is their performance after we took the blood sample. We also follow the female up to wean, right? And we look whether or not they die after parturition. This is just monitor failure of passive transfer. How, you know, and we also measure colostrum quality and any health event, right? So we were trying to link how we manage cows, you know, pre-fresh, how that impacts not only the cows that we already know they're going to have compromised immune system, if those cows are hypocalcemic or low calcium. And what we didn't know is if those females are coming from moms that they are low in calcium, how they perform when they are, you know, in the first 60 days of life, right? And then we are very interested in diarrhea early on for those baby cows. So here is the information. So this is the diet ingredients that we were fed by a group of cows, and I'll be happy to share at the end of the presentation the nutrients for each of these diets. But anyway, so here is the pre-fresh diet and the fresh diet. So grass hay, alfalfa, corn silage, and on top of that, cows were also grazing. So it's a combination of TMR and grazing, and also you have the diet for fresh cows. So the most important for us was this, because we know that by controlling how we control this pre-fresh diet, that will dictate how the cows do perform early on in lactation. So here is the serum calcium within 2 hours after calving. And so the green box, and again, here is lactation numbers up to 8 lactation. And then here is the calcium, as I mentioned before. Here is a milligram by deciliter. So, but anyway, any cow that was above 8.0, it was considered normal. So as you can see here that the cows go from 8.0 to almost 11. Each one of these dots represent a cow. And any cow that was below 8, it was considered either subclinical or milk fever, right? And so very few cows has low calcium using that diet that I mentioned to you, but a number of cows do have a lot of subclinical events, right? And so when I look at the prevalence, I usually look, okay, how my first lactation cows do. So these are heifers, you know, pregnant heifers that became third lactation. So about 9%. 9% of them, they do have their calcium in blood is lower than 8.0. So, and about 30% of cows, whatever, you know, whether, regardless of the lactation number, about 30% if you combine all cows, they are below 8.0, but it's clearly as the cow age, right, and they produce more, and that is, you know, their prevalence increase. So there is a risk factor with age in cows. So here is the effect of calcium status at calving on health of lactating cows. And then again, these are cows managed under organic management. So here we split cows, you know, cows that did not have any problems, right? Those are cows more than 8 milligrams by deciliters, and cows that were below. So these cows were below 8 point, you know, we consider that the calcium status, they were either clinical or subclinical. So there is a significant association with metritis, so they have higher prevalence of metritis, right? There was not a clear cut as far as the mastitis goes, and there was a clear increase in cold cows, so these sick cows sometimes end up, exiting the system, so they were cold within 60 days in milk, higher for hypocalcemic cows. And when we look, those cows that survive the 60 days in milk, remember this farm has a 45-day voluntary waiting period, so they start bringing back cows after 45 days. Those cows that survive those 60 days or 45 days, there was not much different. And again, this is there was no difference for first AI services. So there is a numerical difference there, but from the statistical point of view, those cows that survive, it was not a problem. So one of our interests for this is how about the effect of calcium status, how the dams are at calving on calf survival and health, right? Is there any link? Because, how much, association is there between how the cows do, that we know that low calcium is usually bad for cows. Is there any link on how the calf perform there, especially on diarrhea events? So when we start looking at this, and again, we have two groups, cows that were below 8.0 and cows that were normal. These are the normal cows. So we look at stillbirth, and there was no difference for stillbirth. So either one of the groups has a equal proportion of stillbirth. Stillbirth it is very important, and because remember this, at calving you need two things for the parturition process. You need energy, so the cow has to have energy, and then you need calcium for contraction. Otherwise, the uterus cannot contract, and so that was important. But for this particular case, and we didn't see any difference. As far as failure of passive transfer, is basically we measure total protein 48 hours after we fed colostrum, right? So we bleed those female calves, and then we measure this with the digital refractometer. And so there was also no difference there. There was no difference in failure of passive transfer. There was no difference in stillbirth. Either this exposure was also not different. And however, these calves did have more diarrhea within 10 days of age, right? So when you look at this, there was a significant difference there. So almost 50% of these calves, and remember, these are the same colostrum management, so all went through the same, but they had higher prevalence than normal cows. And for those cows, from birth to weaning, remember, there was no difference. So even though we did found higher prevalence of diarrhea, so meaning either one event or more than one event of diarrhea, we didn't wait, we didn't get weaning weight, but we do know that pre-weaning growth rate in this particular study was not assessed. Calf diarrhea, all those calves that had diarrhea, they got reduced average daily gain. So because older people have been looking at this issue. So if the cat has one or two diarrhea events in 60 days, usually that is what is going to impact, their growth performance. And I really want to emphasize the first 60 days of life, because that determines the entire performance of the lifetime of the cow. So the lifetime performance is dictated to a great extent those 60 days, the first 60 days of life. So how the female calf perform there, usually we are looking for this calf to double the birth weight. So if the calf is born with 40 pounds or 60 pounds, right, a 60-pound calf, and we are looking for a weaning weight of at least 120 pounds, so in a 60-day period. That is very important for calves. So any incident of diarrhea, pneumonia, all those are going to start lagging behind. And that those are the most important because those are going to be the future mom, or farm, and that also impact their lifetime performance as far as new production goes. So this is a very interesting paper on nutrition, transition cow nutrition and feeding management for disease prevention. I really like this, and it really emphasizes, the last 2 months of gestation. In our study, when we look at this, that we were able to find, that hypocalcemia not only affect the cow, but also affect the calf, especially those female calves. We didn't look, and we are looking at now more close the last 2 months of gestation. Remember that the last 2 months of gestation, on average, this is our dry period, right? And how we manage our dry period, if you are drying cow based on expected calving date, so this is going to be about 2 months. And I have now my, this rectangular box. But what it shows you there, right, is the conceptus. This is the total, right? The conceptus and the fetus and the fluid. It is an exponential growth, specifically the last 3-4 weeks, right? So how we manage this period? This is an exponential growth for the calf, and that might be something associated that why these calves, whether or not they have a direct link, and why they develop diarrhea early on in lactation. As well as also we are looking at how we manage these cows early on in lactation, especially prior to fertilization, right? Because it's when the cows start putting together colostrum. And there might be some factors in colostrum that might link why, any other than the immunoglobulins that we know and we measure in our study, and there was no difference there. So it must be something else associated with why baby calves develop or are more at risk of developing diarrhea. So the basic physiological functions to avoid transition cow diseases, and I list the first one. The first one is resting time. And there is not a priority order, but I put it in this order because it explains the cascade of events. So the cow has to rest. If you compromise resting, you probably end up with having low dry matter intake. Dry matter intake and adaptation of the rumen to lactation diet, it really matters. Specific, are we meeting the energy and protein required? Specific, I'm looking at for ketosis early on in lactation. Maintenance of normal calcemia, it is very important because these 3 factors here will determine, the immune system, how strong the immune system is. And if the immune system is not working properly, these determine the prevalence of both metabolic and infectious diseases. So these are things that especially resting time early on prior to parturition, and early on in parturition, primary intake, adaptation of the rumen to lactation diet, and how we balance the nutrients early on in lactation that really matter for a cow. And I'm going to add a little bit more now on water quality. Whether or not our water quality play a role in this basic physiological function. So in general, cows are going to, every cow has produced different amount of colostrum. Right? And I always look the first 24 hours after parturition. So here is an example. So if the cow produced 20 pounds of colostrum, right, here is all the energy that she required, how many grams of proteins, right? But the most important is how much calcium. So on average, she might need about 23 grams of calcium, right? For just only 24 hours. So if a cow produced 60 pounds of colostrum in the first 24 hours, she probably needs about 90 grams of calcium, right? And remember how big of this challenge is that the calcium loss in colostrum is about 15 to 20 to 10 to 15 times higher than what we have in blood, in circulation. So a mature cow is going to have 4 or 5 grams of calcium total. But she needs about 10, 15 times more just for those 24 hours. And they don't, right? After every time that you milk a cow, she's going to lose calcium. And remember, she cannot control because there is not a switch on and off in the mammary tissue. That is a set amount of calcium that goes to milk. So, and this is what poses a challenge, because early on is when the cow has compromised the dry matter intake, such as the normal process of parturition and recovery. You know, the cow are recovering after calving. So, dry matter intake became kind of the backbone, right? And it's very difficult because you can't go to the field and tell the cow eat more. So you gotta offer comfort, and as much as possible comfort, so cow, you know, eat to their potential. So here is the box there kind of highlights a critical point, right? And these are just, you know, normal cows and based on dry matter intakes and kilos a day, right? And if you want in pounds, you just multiply these by 2, and you get a rough estimation in pounds of dry matter intake, right? And but usually cows, as they get closer to parturition is day 0 here, right? The dry matter goes down, and then after parturition they go back up again. Right? So in about 2 weeks, the cow is going to be fully recovered. You know, usually fully recovered. They're going to have dry matter, and usually after that, usually hypocalcemia should not be a problem. So we offer these cows high calcium, rich calcium diet, and that should be enough to provide for the cow. So the challenge for cow is this specific within this critical window, just these 4 or 5 days, right? These 4 or 5 days, it causes a cascade of events for the cow. And that is why early on in lactation, either it's a combination of a low dry matter intake or a combination of how we formulate those diets early on if the cow are also losing too much weight. And a combination of factors make up for the final calcium balance. And within this square box and how we manage cows prior to parturition, I'm going to talk now about water quality, how that impacts the calcium balance. So here is a more broad view about transition cow management, and I put there kind of my box, you know, for resting time, drop in dry matter intake, ketosis, and hypocalcemia. And we've been measuring our pre-fresh cows. Either you have only one fresh pen, 60-day, and you group all cows together, and or if the farm is big enough, you probably have a different group of cows. But if this is a typical small, medium-sized farm, you very likely are going to have only just one pen. So we look for our cows and heifers, right? Pregnant cows and heifers that has to be closed about 14 hours a day, right? This is just for our resting time, right? And our fresh cows about 12.5 hours. So if you're below these benchmark values, what we start seeing, you know, there are farms that have 8 hours or 9, and there are farms here that have 10. So what we see is that when cows are below this benchmark value, they start, you know, losing weight prior to parturition. This is bad. And when they lose weight prior to parturition. And also, when they are very low, like 8 hours a day resting. So resting is just basically we use a thermometer and we measure how many hours. This is perhaps the easiest way to improve cow comfort. Right, what cows are doing on a daily basis. So if they are 8 hours or 9, so they start losing weight too fast, right? And it causes a problem. It's a metabolic problem for the liver. So the liver has to process a huge amount of fat that the cow is mobilizing. And why the cows are losing weight early on in lactation? Because milk production goes up. Right? The cow is producing more milk, but also there is a problem in dry matter. So the cow is not fully recovered dry matter intake. So all these dry matter intake early on in lactation, she's going to compensate with fat. Right? Mobilizing fat, the speed that the cow, how quick they mobilize fat and how much fat they mobilize, that is important also, because our cows, they also may get sick and develop both, ketosis problem and hypocalcemia early on in lactation. So if we manage this well, usually cows are going to lose. Very few cows are going to develop ketosis, and you are going to have a very nice peak of lactation, right, about 60 days and more. So when we talk about water quality, this is perhaps very important. And because I look for these 4 elements, I look for sodium and potassium, and basically how you do this is you just get the water and whatever the cows are drinking. So you go to the pen and the water bin and you collect the water sample from there. And then you submit for analysis. I'll show you now an analysis in a few minutes. And then I look the 4 main components. I look the cations, usually those are the positives, and I look the anions, sulfate and chloride. Right? These are important because there is one group of cows that are very sensitive, and usually it's dry cows. Right? The combination of, the contribution of these minerals, the water contribution of the minerals is going to affect usually dry cows. Right? But that determines how we manage dry cows, that determine the prevalence of hypocalcemia early on. Right? You are not going to have an organic decaf diet or an anionic salt. And I don't know, we don't have anything like that yet. And so this technology is being used for conventional farms. So basically what this means is that we provide the cow with high concentration of either one of the negatives. And I explain now in a few minutes why this is important. So a decaf diet is basically you provide high either sulfate or high chloride. Right? Then you provide a negative to the cow. So this is just as a summary, the negative energy balance of pre-fresh cows and early lactation. It does affect the immune system and it does affect the reproductive performance. Right? Early on, the cows are going to mobilize fat just to compensate for some of basically how we manage our diet. The cow is going to mobilize fat, and that is what we measure when you can measure this, right? And then we call that meat. That tells you whether or not the cow is losing weight, right? And then another component that is more associated with energy, right? You can measure these ketosis, right? These 2 components, usually we measure NIFA prior to calving, and we measure DHBA after calving. You can measure day 7 and day 14. And that tells you an idea how cows are doing early on in lactation, and those together make up the calcium, the negative energy balance. So, and there are individual responses. This is just a classic example. This is just for a conventional farm, right? I just thought this is not an organic farm, but this is a conventional farm. And you can see these cows are all the same diet, but they all respond different to the same management. So here is a cow, any cow that has more than 1.2 millimolars per liter of DHBA for ketosis, it's considered a problem, right? Either subclinical ketosis or clinical. So as you can see here, a normal cow, this one has a higher DHBA, so the cow, I know that they had energy problems. This is normal, And this is a cow that had really high DHA. Still not clinical yet, but this is getting close to a clinical cow, so the cow gets sick. And so these two cows have probably compromised the immune system. So even in the same group of cows, they don't react the same to each management. This is basically the same as any other farm. So these are just parameter and reference values for you, and I'm not going to go through these specific things, but there is a test, and the HbA and EPA, this is just basically for energy balance, and then reference values for each one of them, an alarm level, the group of cows at risk, and the associated diseases, right? And urine pH, we don't usually measure urine pH unless that you probably have a water quality issue. Maybe you can measure just to see in organic farm how they do pretty fresh cows. And I give you an example now, cows that you probably want to measure just to see if the cows are getting too negative, you know, prior to parturition. You can measure urine pH and kind of get an idea how the cows are reacting to the diet and to the water that they are drinking. And then the blood calcium, and this is something that your veterinarian can do for you and make an interpretation on whether or not there is a problem. And, but anyway, this is just a summary of some parameters and reference values to look at this, what we call the metabolic profile of cows, either prior to parturition or right after parturition. So the underlying principle to maintain blood calcium concentration, we have to maximize the ability of the gut to absorb calcium, and this is why we feed diets that are high in sulfate or chloride, right? Because this is when the cow can find the GI tract to absorb as soon as they go through parturition, and we start feeding high calcium diet. It's important that the cow eat. So dry matter intake is really important there. And for example, one of the things that the cows usually do not eat is if they do have dystocia. Dystocia, or difficult calving, is usually associated with pain. And the reaction to pain, usually cows do not drink and do not eat. And that is the cascade of events. They start losing weight too fast, the immune system is compromised, and they get sick. Maximize the ability of bone to release calcium, and maximize the ability of kidney to reabsorb calcium. So the cow has to have these three components in place, you know, at the time of parturition. So here is a strategy. And for hypocalcemia, the first option or choice, you know, you look at your diet. You have to get an idea of what you are feeding to your cows. And this is important. You work either with your veterinarian or your nutrition. Even if you are raising cows, you have to have an idea what you are offering to the cows, the diet and your water quality, because the dry matter, what the cows eat, and what the cows drink, it make up the final balance. So one of the options to prevent hypocalcemia is to offer this diet, right? Magnesium and vitamin B, and those are the easy things, usually easy, you know, phosphorus, and all those are percentages are based on dry matter. The difficult component, whether or not, is potassium and calcium. You gotta keep potassium low, 1% dry matter, and calcium, you know, about 0.5%, 0.5. So in brief, you know, you do the easy things, like calcium as close as possible, and potassium as low as possible. If you are feeding alfalfa, potassium is usually the limitation because it's going to be high. And, but this is one of the first choices to prevent, you know, or at least minimize hypocalcemia. You need to know what you are feeding cows, and as well you need to know the water quality. The second strategy I'm not going to cover, but the second strategy is dealing with this anionic salt. This is what we use in some of the conventional farms. A number of them, they use what we call DCAT diet or anionic salt. And basically what the DCAT diet do have is, we are feeding high concentration of these or high concentration of these. These are pre-fresh, these are the diet pre-fresh, so prior to partition. And higher concentration of these create a metabolic acidosis right to the cow. And that is how you prime the GI tract. So the GI tract is primed, and then when she freshens and goes to the fresh diet that has to be rich in calcium, the GI tract can absorb as much as possible. It usually absorbs calcium available in the diet. So, but I'm whether or not you use this, an organic, I'm not aware of any anionic diet, and similar to what we use in convention. There might be some more, but I'm not aware of any. So, but I'm going to give you the principle. What is the DCAT? DCAT stands for dietary cation-anion difference, right? So we want our pre-fresh cows to be a little bit negative, right? Negative. And there is a spreadsheet. If anybody wants the spreadsheet on how to calculate this, please send me an email. At the end of my presentation, I'm going to have my email, and I'll be very happy to give you the spreadsheet. The spreadsheet, you should plot the numbers from your diet, from your water quality, and then you have the numbers. So you want, to be effective, this diet has to be a little bit negative, 15 to 20, but not too negative. Because if the cows are very negative, you probably drop dry matter intake. Because of the metabolic acidosis, the cow will refuse to keep eating. So they never refuse to eat. And then fresh cows, you have to be positive for, to improve production between 25 to 40. And so there is a spreadsheet in an Excel that you plot based on the diet, the mineral contribution of the diet, the mineral contribution of the water, and you come up with this number. This is very simple and to be done. You just need to know your mineral contribution from both. The diet is on percent dry matter, and water is in ppm. So milk is 80% water. So that's the diet matter. The diet usually matters, but this is very important. And I see a number of operations, and specifically for organic farms, that they have issues with their water quality. And that became, without, the basic principle, it's very difficult to develop any preventive program. So your water became you really need to know what is your water quality. When I look at the water quality, I look at this. So this is the classic example. You just submit a water for analysis, and this is what you're going to get. When I look at the water, I look at this. I look potassium, right? For this farm is 6.47, and then I look sodium. In this farm, these are the positives. So these are the cations, right, in the formula. And also you look in the diet. So 6.47, and this is okay. And then I look the negatives, right? I look the chloride and the sulfate. And the sulfate, when you ask for sulfate, you gotta look for this one. Sulfate, SO4. So this is, chloride is these are usually in ppm. This is extremely high. This is extremely high for a farm, right? So basically, if the cows are drinking this water, and remember, you're going to have only one water source for all cows, either dry cows or lactating cows. So how the water quality, is there any role, for water quality and diet based on, on how cows perform? So here is the example. So I use that water quality, right, and the mineral contribution from my dry cows. So here I have the contribution of the water. Remember, these are coming from the previous water analysis, right? Here is the contribution of the diet. Milligram by liter is the same as ppm. Right? So the contribution of the diet, this is coming from your diet. This is why you need to know this information. How do you know? You send a sample, whatever the cows are eating, right? And your nutritionist or your veterinarian can help you get all this information put together. And then the Excel file calculate your TCAT. Right? My goal in yellow is about -15 to -20. But for this particular, whatever the cows are eating prior to parturition, she's very negative. Right? What happens is there, when the cows are very negative, right? And this is a farm that are only drinking this water, right? They are not adding any anionic salt. They are just getting that negative by drinking that water. So what happened is cow will have this metabolic acidosis and they may refuse to eat. So the way you know they are losing weight is you start bleeding cows, getting a blood sample 7 days prior to parturition, and they may have high NIFA, so high non-esterified fatty acid. That meaning that the cow is not eating enough to meet the requirement, so she's mobilizing fat. In heifers, that is usually bad. It's really bad, and they are going to have a lot of metabolic problems early on, regardless of how much production they have after parturition. So I use the same water. So remember that this is the same water for my fresh cow. I went through parturition. Here is my fresh cow. So, and I change a little bit the diet. You can adjust the water analysis, your water quality, adjusting the diet. But still, my diet is not positive. Even I made the adjustment because I had to use positive things. I cannot change my water quality. I cannot either more potassium or more sodium, right? Sodium, even adjusting this, as you can see, the TCAT, the balance, right, is still negative. And I want my cows to be a little bit more positive. So what are the potential issues there? You increase calcium loss in fresh cows because of the negative exposure, right? It might be a drop in dry matter intake, and this drop in dry matter intake, it might be associated with the metabolic acidosis. So cows have this metabolic, they just may refuse to eat more. That increase the negative energy balance, and post-parturition increase the ketosis and the prevalence of disease. And that prevalence of disease, especially metritis, you're going to have low performance. Reproduction is the obvious one, and depending on severity, you may have low reproduction, and especially if that is combined with mastitis. So now I'm going to cover very briefly about, okay, for prevention, I can use and manage my pre-fresh cows. That is probably one of the ways that you can manage hypocalcemia. Okay, I do as much as I can for prevention. What can I do? Even I do my prevention, cows might get sick. Okay, what I can do for these cows sick? This is a nice study that looks at the effect of calcium bolus supplementation, right? And I believe that you can use 2 boluses, the bolus of calcium, the Bovical, and some others. You just need to check with your livestock certifier to make sure this is something you can use for your organic cows. So, but very simple, this is a farm that they use 2 boluses, right? After calving, they start enrolling cows and they give 1 bolus. And I remember this is, I think, about 75 grams of calcium. So it's a big oral bolus. So they provide a bowl of calcium after calving between 0 and 2 hours, and then again between 8 and 35 hours after parturition. So 2 bolus, and then they look the performance. So what they were able to find is that cows that has a previous history of high producing, so the previous lactation, they were high producing, using this strategy, and this is in a conventional farm, this study, but it shows positive effect, and this is important, and it produced almost 7 pounds more of milk at the first DHI test. And for laying cows, they have a history of being laying in the prior lactation, right? Or at calving, they have 34% less health events. There is an impact in health, and there is an impact in milk production. And remember, this is in conventional farms. And it might be a good strategy for our organic farms that perhaps they don't produce as much, but they would really benefit from this catch. This is a very nice study that shows a positive effect to a very simple strategy of supplementing calcium right after parturition and again about 8 to 35 hours later. So grouping priorities, depending whether or not this is a farm, the most important here is what I'm going to really emphasize is if you got milk fever or hypocalcemia problem, it's usually free fresh. Right? It's usually how you feed cows free fresh. You got uterine diseases, usually free fresh because it's associated with milk fever. So either it could be also fresh here. Ketosis is either or. So it's free fresh or fresh. Displaced abomasum is either free fresh or fresh, and retained placenta is free fresh. So here is kind of a group of priority when you start looking at your cows. Where do I have my problem? Right? And I brought this grouping priority slide because something that I like a lot is, and I've seen this in large operations, but as well in a 50 cow farm. All the replacement heifers, when they are 40 or 20 days prior to parturition, they train the replacement heifers. They go with the cow to the parlor once per week for training. I think this is a very nice approach. They get used to the machine, they get used to the smell, they get used to the noise, they get used to people, right? And that really, it is important because for heifers, they go through delivery and they initiate lactation. This is a very stressful time, especially maternity and early on in lactation. So heifers are familiar with the parlor, familiar with the noise, and familiar with personnel. This is how you maximize dry matter intake, just removing some of these noise or risk factors that are associated with dry matter intake. So with that, and this is just getting to the end, I just animal health and regulation, the National Organic Program, they do provide, please do contact your veterinarian and ask for information on what can I use that is listed in the National Organic Program. There is the list that you can find some of those approved or unapproved information, and then some of the other links that are associated with the FDA and animal health ICBO guidelines. And so with that, I will take any question you may have now.
Thank you, Dr. Gustavo. This is time to type some questions into your question box there on your screen. Thank you for attending this webinar presentation. Still looking for some questions.
You do have my email there. You can email me, and if you want to have the Excel spreadsheet and how to calculate your DCAT, I'll be very happy. Just drop me an email and I'll send that to you.
All right. I just have a comment here that was a very informative webinar. Thank you, Dr. Gustavo, for presenting that. Any questions? Again, I'd like to thank you guys for attending the webinar here today. This is a continuing series of webinars that we're presenting here with in conjunction with OSU Extension. This recording was indeed recorded and will be archived on our website, www.oeffa.org. There's a link right there on our homepage. This is a continuation of the series. There were 6 webinars presented last year. We have a few more coming up later this year, typically once a month. In lieu of questions, we'll just go ahead and send us an email if you have any. Dr. Gustavo is available as well as I. All right, well, thank you for your time.